All right. Sorry about the delay at lunch. We didn't anticipate the crowd, and it was. But anyways, really appreciate everybody coming back from lunch and leaving again. Our next topic for discussion is special purpose depository institutions, the Speedy Bank. At this time, I'm going to request, actually, Division of Banking. Do you guys want to kick this one off? Nope. All right. So we've got listed on, yeah, okay. Thanks, guys. Everybody loves the Speedy Bank.
Quote one of my favorite movies, "You're killing me, Smalls."
Yeah.
Again, Albert Faulkner, Banking Commissioner. I was trying to pull up the document here. We give a little history of where we were from this time last year, and actually even from the session. We have had a massive amount of numbers of meetings, calls. We definitely, the goal was to get nationwide and in some instances global attention, you were successful. And so I'm still waiting for my commission on that part, but I'm sure the check's in the mail, right? Anyway, so we had a number of meetings and fleshing out what is the industry, will quote unquote, looking for in the SPDI and then, like I said, the Speedy Bank. It's changed, at least in my mind, definitely from last fall, even early in the session, from what the original intent was. I think what the demands were. There's definitely a demand for some banking services, no doubt. But that is, at least in our conversations, not the primary demand anymore. And a couple reasons. I would say that there are, again, getting to be more and more banks in that space, at least doing some basic banking services. But the passage of Senate File 125 obviously was somewhat of a game changer regarding clarity in the digital asset space. And so based on those discussions and kind of fact finding, getting high level discussions of potential business plans, meeting with possible entrants into the state, well established companies, realize that there's a few things, and also getting a fresh look at the Enrolled Act. What do we need to tweak? And I think we probably all expected that there would be some changes coming. I mean, when you stand up that, create an entirely new institution in a matter of months. Didn't quite get it all perfect, but we don't have a whole lot of suggestions, but we did identify some things that will make it easier for the potential applicants and our office, as well as the administrator of that law, to kind of refine what they're wanting to do. And the reason I say that is, you think about with a bank charter, even a trust company charter, with a charter granted by a regulatory authority, the institution is granted all the powers that come with that charter, even if they don't want all the powers. And so, along with those lines, so if an institution can exercise a number of powers, their business plan has to contemplate that at some point, because again, we can't throttle that. They could, if the charter is approved and they're operating day one, and say, oh, you know what, maybe we do want to do this. Well, we need to make sure that they factor that in, because that may have a material impact on the banking board's decision as well as ours in an investigation of that. Are they set up to, in fact, engage in that activity as well? So we're trying to refine that. We think we need an ability to limit the charter a little bit, in the sense that if the banking board and the division of banking can limit that based on the business plan, then the business plan doesn't have to be comprehensive and contemplate those powers that the institution really has no interest in. Now, that doesn't say they can't come back to the commissioner at some point in time and say, we would like to exercise this as well and get that approval, but it makes it easier on the front end. And kind of, we've had those discussions with some potential applicants about fixing that a little bit, because, like I said, they don't want to waste time and energy presenting some plan that they really are never going to engage in that kind of business. So we've got kind of that idea that we need to flesh out. I think we've got that around there. We have another proposal, again, thinking back to the discussions that the SPDI was for commercial only, non-consumer or non-retail, if you want to. Well, and I still think that that's the case, but there are a few potential plans out there, businesses, that they need a consumer portion for the custodial activities, and so, but they're also a depository, and the goal is to get the a consumer, any one of us, to be able to open up an account on the deposit side solely for the purpose of acquiring the on and off ramp into the crypto space. You know, and so we've been grappling, well, how do we do that? Because again, if the intent was to be an alternate bank, then we need to make sure we don't have creep, scope creep within that, but yet recognizing the custodial aspect, we do need one more on and off ramp, and so we're going to propose the idea of allowing the consumer to open an account, again, very similar to a brokerage account. The broker's not in the business of banking, but they'll take cash and then they invest it, and you may hold on to a little bit of cash. Here it's a little different because of the transactional nature of a checking account, in essence. We don't want them to be issuing checkbooks, debit cards, to where it is a transactional account. It is for a single purpose, and that is to, in effect, move from your primary institution, where you actually do have your checking account and your debit card, to this entity in order to then fund the acquisition. And then the off ramp too. They liquidate a crypto and it goes into that account and then can be moved in some fashion to their primary banking. And this is the retail side. So I think we've probably got a solution to that as well. A small statutory fix, but I think even that we can probably tackle in our rules, a lot of it. Some additional clarity, but we're working on that. And then one other item, again, the pledge of capital, as a protection that we're talking about, since it is an uninsured. It was originally drafted based on our trust company model. That's capital structure in a bank is much different than a trust company, and so looking at the pledging of a bank's capital doesn't work in the way that we intended to have it bank. So we're gonna propose recommending replacing the term pledged capital of assets, unencumbered assets. That's a much more traditional method across the states in asset pledge requirements, and in that way you can protect that better. The state is protected because if you think about capital, it's common stock surplus and undivided profits in a bank, and there's very little opportunity to invest that. Trust companies have a much broader authority to invest their capital, so there's just not a good way to manage that. There could actually be legal issues with it. So, but if you have an asset pledge and sufficient liquid asset, then that's much easier to protect on our side. It protects the state. They still have the luxury of utilizing the asset or the income off the asset, but that's a much more traditional approach to it. So, oh yeah. The other issue, discussion that was prevalent last year regarding the de-risking of this industry. Operation Choke Point was mentioned, and all those things. And so we had that shall issue clause, basically not allowed to de-risk certain sectors and avoid that. And how do you do that? That is actually problematic for industry, believe it or not. And tell you why is the thought is there might be an actor that while the business meets the requirements as set out in the statute, because there was 3 or 4 requirements that if they do this, this, and this, you shall issue. Well, what if one of the principals is actually a convicted felon, wire fraud, bank fraud, things like that? That nobody would bank based on that criminal background, even a simple checking account. And so there are companies that don't actually want to have that, because then now they're bringing in potential risk into their institution, and that's, again, that was brought to us by potential participants in this space. And so, and I would agree with that. That's didn't articulate it very well last year, but you could have a very viable legal industry or company, but you could actually have principles behind that have a criminal background, again, in the financial fraud area, that would disqualify them from any institution. Now, do we want to be punitive, and does that stick around with them forever? I know the legislature tackled that on the licensing side last year, and some legislation last couple of years, that a person shouldn't have to carry that weight. They paid their debt to society at some point, get her back in. But this is a little bit different. I think that the institution and the shall issue is problematic. I think that also might be a little problematic. Not speaking for the Fed, but they may have some issues with that as well. In looking at, well, this institute, it's an increased risk, and is that something we want to consider in a master account issuance, things like that. Again, that's my thought. That part is my thought, not that of the Federal Reserve, but it's definitely it's have to be a.
On that last point, Commissioner, one of the concerns with the reason we put that language in, obviously, was a concern about refusal to grant a master account. And by changing that language, we felt like there was more comfort in, all right, well, this will help to ensure that. Are we putting ourselves back in the position where we then have to be worried, all right, maybe there's not going to be any granting of master account, maybe there'll be a problem where we don't accomplish the objective that we set out with or set up for when we drafted it as a shall issue?
Mr. Chairman, I don't think so. Again, I want to be clear that I can't speak on behalf of it, so we're all somewhat guessing, right? No, there's not a metric out there at the Federal Reserve that says this, and this, and you shall be granted a master account. There's some case law around it, but that's a different issue. I think here we've actually heard that their institutions don't want that in place because they're potentially bringing risk into their institution for this. How do you balance that? Because we don't want to have it open to, in essence, de-risk carte blanche. Although I think just the creation of this institution is for that very purpose, to avoid that, to be open to that. So, and practically speaking, I don't think that there is, but again, this is collaboration between us. This isn't just the division of banking coming back and saying, okay, we still don't like this. It's having discussions again on next steps with applicants, and that's one issue that is concerned.
Thank you. Committee discussion, questions? Ms. Long?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Forkner, so basically the way I understand this, 1 and 4 I see are somewhat together because they take away some of the requirements that's in the existing SPDI. Number 4, which is adding the incidental retail, is adding, and number 3 I think is just kind of I would just consider it a cleanup amendment. It's not substantive. So if those 4 things get done by the legislature and enacted into law, will you support those changes, and what will it do in terms of bringing in new businesses to Wyoming?
Commissioner.
Chairman, Ms. Long, to the last part of the question, I don't know if it will. I would assume so. Again, these are based on these suggestions. These are our suggestions, and so we are supportive of them in the sense that they're based on 4 months of 4 meetings a week discussions, and so that part we would. If you build it, will they come? Well, they're coming. So we have built it. We're refining it, and they're coming. It's just a matter of, it's not really when, if, it's when. So I think that, and to your point, these are all issues that what we're seeking, and my goal as a regulator, and also trying to be cognizant of the companies, is regulatory clarity. Right? We've had that discussion for a year and a half, 2 years. And it does not do us any good to have uncertainty in law any more than it does the institutions that are subject to that. And so these are items, refrain from saying they're small changes because they could be substantive in impact, but these are changes that I think are providing that little bit more clarity, a little more guidance, and make sure that it's as business friendly as possible. without avoiding the intent of the institution, again, becoming a full-on retail bank that just doesn't like the FDIC. That was never the intent, but we recognize what these are, and I think especially the retail tied to custody activities, that's significant. That's probably the most significant. As the regulator, the asset pledge is significant to us in protecting our position there and protecting the state of Wyoming. But those two pieces are a pretty big deal.
Paul, Ms. Long, anything?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When we use the word custody, we're using it in the broadest term. There are a lot of sub pieces under custody, and we're talking about commodities too when we use custody in this context. So custody refers to kind of the fiduciary or quasi-fiduciary management of digital assets and safekeeping and transaction execution. But custody is a term of art under the securities law. So that has a specific meaning, but what we're talking about here is kind of an umbrella of lots of activities.
Additional questions?
Mr. Chairman, there is a draft bill here, and obviously they don't have any of these 4 provisions in them. What is the commissioner's suggestion on timing, and how do we actually execute?
Yeah,
Go ahead,
Mr. Chairman, Ms. Long, I'll also let Chris opine as well. Again, since he knows this inside and out as the principal drafter of most of this. The suggestion would be to not act on that. We've had some issues with that language and be replaced by what we're proposing. Unfortunately, the timing was such that we just weren't able to get a document any quicker because we were still fleshing out how to tackle some of the suggestions that have been brought to us. But cognizant of what the committee's activity, I think once LSO, if you so direct them to kind of look at our version and see what the thoughts are. One, the actual drafting of it shouldn't be significant, but the substance of it, even that is, I guess I don't see it as controversial. There may be people here in the room or yourselves that see these as potential controversial proposals. I just don't see that, and that's why, again, it took us a while to get to there because we wanted to make sure, and those of you that worked with Chris, make sure that he makes sure that it's perfect and then some. And so that's why the kind of late breaking. But I would imagine the task force could easily tackle that at the September meeting, and then still have time. I don't know if it's minerals or corporations that it may go to. I don't know what their schedules are, but my thoughts are that there's probably still time to get those to a committee. If so, you choose.
Any thought? Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, just from my perspective, knowing about the incredible level of interest from the industry in the SPDI, I think it is important that we get this right, and I'm fine to set this back and receive your language and with the expectation that this is a priority that would need to get done at the next meeting.
Thank you, Ms. Long. Any additional discussion, committee? What about Mr. Cole? Okay. What about the concept that we have here? Is that something else that is it the language or the concept? This is a little bit different. This is providing digital asset custodial services pursuant to the requirements above, but only to the extent that the services do not conflict with any requirements of this chapter. That's basically what this legislation does, is allow for a speedy bank to provide digital asset custodial services. So that was not mentioned in the 4 points of these are the things that we need to ensure are in the next draft. It is a different concept. So what are your thoughts on the concept itself?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So one of the reasons why we want to take some time and get this right is we don't want to say custodial services. We want to be slightly more detailed and define the scope to provide more legal clarity to the institutions. Also, the second piece, the last clause of the amendment that's in the bill contains, has to be consistent with the rest of the law, and that's not the direction that would actually make it harder for the retail custody piece to be implemented. So,
I see. Okay. So this language can, in a different form, be incorporated into the next piece of legislation, but in a manner that's a little more sensitive to those nuances and to ensuring that we're not breaking your 2 points. Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay. Further discussion? Further discussion? Seeing none, any further points before we go to the testimony? Thank you both. Committee, anything before we open for testimony? All right, seeing none, open up for public testimony on 20 LSO, nope, excuse me, just on the general concept of special purpose depository institutions. Please join us. For the record, state your name and welcome.
Hi, it's Bobby Zagata, Head of Strategy and Operations for Kraken. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Thought I would just share a few thoughts on the SPDI. Well, firstly, we think it's a really innovative model and really novel legislation. We're out talking to lots of jurisdictions all the time, and this is what we think of when we talk about common sense problem solving to real industry issues. So applaud your efforts here. It's really, really helpful. As it's currently written, and to Commissioner Faulkner's point, the value and utility of it is a bit limited because of how appropriate depositors is defined as institutions. So as you guys probably know, the vast majority of the crypto marketplace today is not institutions. It's law-abiding citizens and individuals who are wanting to participate in lots of different ways. So by limiting the appropriate depositors of the SPDI, you're really limiting the opportunity for Wyoming and for the types of companies that want to come and do business here. So we're very interested in seeing that change that Chris and Commissioner Faulkner just spoke about play out. We also think it's important how that gets enacted matters. So, and these guys alluded to it as well. What is in statute versus what is in rulemaking. And from our selfish perspective, as we consider this path, along with many other paths that we're looking at, we're considering a significant investment on our part in terms of potentially standing up a bank or an institution in a jurisdiction. There's lots of operations, lots of systems, lots of work that goes into that, and of course, capital. So, you'd like to go into that with some clarity on exactly what is covered and exactly how the law will play out relative to that institution. So we're interested to see how that part of the definition plays out as well. That's my comments.
Thank you. Any questions? All right.
Killed
Thank you,
it.
Bob. Appreciate it. Excellent. Additional public testimony. Anyone else have any thoughts on special purpose depository institutions? Welcome back, Mr. Co-Chairman. All right. Going once, going twice. Gone. Public testimony is closed. Back to the committee. Committee discussion on special purpose depository institutions. Mr. Co-Chairman,
Yeah,
you
thank
can
you.
take back the chairmanship if you like.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The Division of Banking specifically went over some of the changes that need to happen. And that's a request for them to be able to handle that type of bank charter in a more meaningful way. And I know that also comes with some of the issues brought by industry that are now looking at doing this banking charter. So my motion would be to adopt those changes as provided by, I believe all of us got an email on that. Mr. Land?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Sorry, you're in the chair now. Sorry, apologies.
Chairs.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We sent a preliminary draft to the two chairmen. It's not quite ready yet, so we need to refine the language a bit, and then we will bring it to you, and then you can determine whether it's ready to move forward and instruct LSO to prepare a bill draft.
Mr. Chairman, can I make a motion?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So my motion would be that our LSO work with the Division of Banking in regards to provided language provided by the Division of Banking cleanup SPDIs and have that prepared. I'm sorry, Ian, Tamara, by the next meeting.
Second, but may I make a friendly suggestion? Also, also to pull back the existing draft. There is a bill in our package that the banking division testified has some challenges, so we'll hold this one back and replace it with a new one for the next meeting.
I accept that as a friendly amendment.
Second.
Question being called. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those
Aye.
opposed, say no. Motion carries.
Mr. Chairman?
Hang on a sec. Mr. Shaw, Tamara, are we just stacking it up on you? Is that going to be doable, do you think?
No, I think that's going to be doable. It would depend. We did not receive a copy of the
Right.
proposal. So if you will send a copy of that to us, then we'll. I mean, it'll depend on the nature of the amendments, what they are, but
Right.
I don't think that's impossible. We'll just need to, for their timing wise, we'll need to do it in the next week.
Right.
Because the meeting's only 4 weeks from now. So.
Right. Division of Banking, you guys are all right with that timeline?
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
Well, I don't want us to necessarily be in the middle of it. I want to ensure that we're involved, but if Division of Banking and LSO can get this sorted out and start the process, because that this is our highest priority, I think, as far as what we need to have drafted well for the next committee meeting. This has the most attention, and we're already starting to roll this one out, so we should get going on this, ensure that it's our best product. Some of the other things we'll have a few chances at, but we need to swing ahead on this one.
If you get the opportunity, I think include the chairman on those emails, and that way we can kind of keep the committee apprised as it moves down the line.
Sounds good.
Thank you. All right.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Ms. Long.
Real quickly, may I just add a comment so that everyone on the task force knows something that happened that really caused the snowball to gather a lot of snow as it was rolling down the hill, which is that the SEC a few weeks ago came out with guidance, informal guidance, but it was the first time they actually said something like this, that had something very significant in footnote 13. And some of you may have seen my tweet about footnote 13, which said that banks have a safe harbor for good control location for digital securities. The interesting point about that is that the FDIC is not allowing banks to get into the digital asset custody business, which means that there is one and only one bank in the United States that can provide a good control location safe harbor for digital securities custody. We have a killer app here.
Yeah, good piece of luck, I guess. I just stumbled into that one. Yeah, no, I know we didn't. All right. So we're going to move on now. Does anybody else want to discuss Speedy Banks before we move on? I really like Speedy Bank. That was smart. Good job, Commissioner Faulkner.
Good product there.
Yeah. Actually, I believe that's actually Mr. Giesi's product because he renamed it Special Purpose Depository Institution. So he's the one that called it Speedy Bank. We just didn't
testify.
He didn't testify? All right.
Got nothing.
All right.
He almost hit me with a car this morning.
Mr. Giesi. Just getting ready for testimony. All right. So we're going to move on, committee. We're moving on to Wyoming Trust Company Regulation and Reciprocity. This is kind of a general comment. If you'll notice in your packets, at the very end, there's a copy of South Dakota's codified law in regards to reciprocal privileges for foreign bank or trust company acting as a fiduciary. And so this is in regards to the reciprocity aspects for trust companies. As you can see that any bank or trust organized in doing the trust business and the laws of any state or territory of the United States of America, including the District of Columbia, other than South Dakota, and a national bank duly authorized so to act may be appointed and may serve in this state as trustee. So it's kind of this big grab bag that South Dakota put out there for trusts. And now, granted, South Dakota has a bunch of really good trust laws, and we've followed them on that, but it's still South Dakota that leads the ring on that. And one of the reasons why could be this, and that's why we just wanted to have the discussion on it. I don't know that we adopt something like this. I've already gotten some emails against it. So I would be interested to hear anybody's thoughts on the reciprocity language that South Dakota uses, and apparently their trust businesses are doing great. So thoughts, committee. Ms. Long.
Mr. Chairman, when we were spitballing, I think I was the one who ended up getting this put on the agenda, apparently, but I didn't even remember that. Part of the reason is that a lot of blockchain businesses are stringing together trust companies with state-by-state money transmitter licenses, and Wyoming doesn't happen to be a reciprocity state. for our trust companies. But frankly, we do have, again, the killer app with the bank, the Speedy Bank, which we think gets reciprocity with 42 states. So I think we have a better solution than the trust company. And I know there's some pushback from the trust industry, having just redone the trust statute last year, that there are folks who really do relish the non-reciprocity. So since we have a solution and we don't want to impede on the competitive advantage of the new trust statute, I'm actually not in favor of providing trust reciprocity. I think maybe this will become ripe in a few years after we've had an opportunity to grab that advantage with the non-reciprocal trust statute, but we don't want to give that away.
Further testimony? Yeah, Mr. Co-Chairman, go ahead.
I'll just say that I'm in agreement with Long on that. I thought that was well said. I don't know that we need to move towards this. And the other thing I'll say is this one's probably a corporations committee topic. Minerals, trust company, right? Minerals committee, because it's broad. It's not limited specifically to the work that we're doing. But if we had a specific angle that we wanted to take advantage of, we could certainly work in the space. But unless somebody comes up in public testimony, I guess I'm able to move it forward at this time.
Any other committee comments? Seeing none, we're going to go open up public comment. I'll invite the Division of Banking up first if you want to jump into this topic. Mr. Land.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Commissioner Forkmer asked me to let you know that he's an exit meeting with a bank exam right now, so he had to meet with the bankers. She just asked me to let you know that the Wyoming Trust Association has been apprised of, they're going to start looking at this issue over the next couple of years. As Ms. Long noted, the trust company business in Wyoming has kind of entered a new phase with the legislation that was adopted last year. We have 2 trust company applications that are pending right now, and several other players that are interested in. So the business is booming, and I think it's probably best if the trust association has a chance to weigh in on the state of the industry and what changes, if any, are needed. So I'll stand for any questions. So thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Land? Seeing none. Thank you, Mr. Land. Any other public comment in regards to trust companies? Seeing none. I'm going to close public comment. Committee, you want to do anything? Doesn't seem like it. All right. Good job. LSO is thankful. I'm certain. We're working them hard enough. So we're going to now move on to Wyoming LLCs. And I would invite the Secretary of State's office to the table, please. Deputy Wheeler, thank you for joining us. And just as a way of background, I know that you were able to watch the live stream and participate that way at the Jackson meeting, but just as kind of a refresher for the committee also and the public, we had a lot of talk about LLCs in Jackson in regards to how they work, how they function. Is there anything that we can do to essentially make them more attractive here than anywhere else? So some of those comments, some of those questions, I don't know if you have prepared remarks in regards to LLCs or any of the discussion that happened in Jackson, but Ms. Wheeler.
Oh, sorry about that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Karen Wheeler, Deputy Secretary of State. The only thing that I wrote anything down about or thought about was a discussion about the temporary use of an LLC. And I'm not sure if you wanted to talk about that or if there are other aspects that you did want to discuss.
All of the above, Deputy.
Wonderful. I really wrangled a lot with the concept of a temporary LLC. And as you know, I did have great concerns about that concept. Simply from the standpoint, as most of you know, in 2008 and actually 2007, Wyoming was under the national spotlight because of our business laws, the anonymity that they provided. And in 2008, our office worked very closely with the legislature to enact groundbreaking legislation regarding registered agents, entities, and records that must be kept, and hit that balance between remaining business friendly, but also not being fraud friendly. And so I felt, and I do still today, feel like we took great steps in not providing anonymity like we used to. And to do a temporary LLC, the first thing that came to my mind is this is an opportunity to provide layers and layers of anonymity, which I find very problematic given some of the scenarios that we've dealt with in our office. And additionally, this will put an enhanced record keeping onto registered agents. If they have an LLC that they temporarily rent out, they are going to have to keep track of who has that LLC at that time. So that when we go to do an audit or law enforcement goes to them wanting to know who's behind that LLC, they have those records. Another concern that I had is you have an entity that's registered with you or with our office, and that name is going to be used multiple times. And I fear that that could cause great confusion with the public. And then I took it down another trail. What about getting a bank account? You know, we have one entity registered with us, it gets an EIN number. How does someone who uses that entity for 2 days get a bank account number? How does someone who then uses it another week later get an account? So those are just some great concerns that I had with that concept.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Co-Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. When I've been thinking about this, I was thinking about, all right, how would I do this under the current system? And imagine I wanted a corporation for 5 days for whatever reason it is. It seems to me that that could be done for on the order of $200 or something, and probably a couple of hours of work. If I was doing it a slow way, if we get the API implemented, then that could probably be instantaneous. But is that the right ballpark realistically? It seems like you can kind of already have a very short-term LLC for a small amount of money, and that maybe we could make that a little easier. But the reality is the barrier seems pretty low to a short-term LLC. Is that fair? And could you walk us through what that process might look like if I did want a 5-day LLC?
Deputy?
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Co-Chairman, absolutely. So for $100, you form and file articles of organization to form an LLC. The quickest way to do it is online. We have online access 24/7. It's done instantaneously. Then, within the statutory parameters that we have now, when you're done with your LLC, whether you form it and use it for 5 days and it's your LLC solely to you, or a week, a month, whatever time that you want to use it, you then have 2 options to dissolve that LLC when you're done with it. Number 1, you can file articles of dissolution for $50. So you've spent $150. Or you can wait until your first annual report is due on that. You don't file your annual report, and 60 days after the due date, our office administratively dissolves that LLC. In that scenario, you have spent $100.
Mr. Chairman,
Yep, go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
can I file the dissolution as an electronic filing, or do I have to do that paper right now? I can't remember. I know that I can build the corporation electronically, but I can't remember if I can dissolve it.
Go ahead, Deputy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Co-Chairman, right now you would have to send in the paper filing.
All right, but I can just wait a year, or a year and 60 days, I guess, and it vanishes without action. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah. Deputy, can you speak towards, I think, I'm trying to remember the House bill, I think it was House Bill 70 in regards to the API for filing. I was wondering if your office had any success looking at that or where that situation is.
Absolutely, Mr. Chairman. So House Bill 70, which was enacted last session and signed by the governor on February 26th, allowed the Secretary of State's office to have until December of 2021 to look at our systems, look at our customer bases, and then go forward with what would be the best fit. So I will tell you what we've done, but before I do that, I'm going to tell you what we've been doing since the session ended, and then you'll understand why we are where we are in our process. So as you will remember, we had two key pieces of legislation during this session that impacted our office dramatically. The first priority for us was the bill that provided an appropriation of $7.5 million for the Secretary of State's office to secure new voting equipment for all 23 counties in Wyoming prior to the 2020 election. So myself, our election director, our technology director, and a member of our election team have been holed up for quite some time. We just finished a 154-page RFP that has gone to purchasing and has now gone out, I believe, to the vendors last week. Also, if you will recall, legislation was passed that created a new entity type, statutory foundation. That had an effective date of July 1st. So we also had to modify our system so that we could accept this new entity type and the filings, which we've done. It went live July 1st. Also, we are in the process, which we do in every odd year. We have to modify and update our campaign finance system and our voter registration system to prepare for the next election in 2020. And we lock those systems down as of January 1st of an election year, that nothing is done until the election. So we've done all that, and we are moving in less than a week. So in all of this, we have been moving forward on House Bill 70, probably not at the pace that you would like, but with our time and resources, here's what we have done. As far as UCCs, we have identified our customer base. We have 1,555 lenders who file online. Our online system is available 24/7. Of those 1,555 lenders, we have 3 that still do paper filings. One is a large governmental entity with an acronym of 3 letters. We also have a small bank who doesn't have the ability to file online. Then we have a third one who I'm not sure why they haven't chosen to file online. So out of that amount, we only have 3 that don't. We also looked at how much our lending users grow year to year, and it is minimal. We might have new lenders of maybe 2 to 3 every 4 or 5 months. So it's not something that grows dramatically. But we are looking at it. We are going to reach out to our customer base, including the 3 that don't file online, and ask them, would you utilize an API? And if so, we will go forward with that as well. Now, as far as our business filing system, I will tell you that we have had had some vendors contact us that we are in discussions with as to what they provide. They have sat down and asked us, what does your system do and how can we work together? So we are in conversations with them as well. So that is where we are today.
Great news. Sounds like we're moving the ball, and that's yeah, you guys are pretty packed, and the whole move back to the Capitol, I'm sure, is not helping the situation. Although it's probably a welcome change where you're currently at.
Mr. Chairman, we are moving to Hersler East. We are not moving to the Capitol. Your 4 elected are in Hersler East. And yes, we are ready to.
Yeah. Yeah, well, Hersler's new too, so. Questions for the Secretary of State's office committee. I'm not seeing any. Looks like you're getting off the hook. I might call you back. Deputy, I ended up getting a notification from a group that has been held up in your office for about a year. I'm trying to find that email. It has to in regards to security.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yep.
Please do. And if I could give one last update.
Yep. Oh, please do.
Series LLCs. That law went into effect July 1st of 18, so we've hit our year mark. And we do have 158 series LLCs that have formed with our office. So those 158, I call them parent LLCs, they represent 3,089 series. Also, we have proposed rules that are going through the chain right now, and this is in response to our naming conventions. And so we have modified our naming convention rules to still give us the flexibility to be able to track series back to the parent. But for those that would also like to add a distinguished word or words to it, we have made the change in the rules that all you need to do is list the full name of the parent first, followed by a hyphen, then all distinguishing words that you want, followed by another hyphen, and then series 1, and so on. Those rules were published online for the public comment period and also put in the Casper Star Tribune on June 7th. The public comment period ended July 18th. We did not have any public comment at all. The rules are now, the final rule packages have been submitted to the Legislative Service Office, the Attorney General, and the Governor. There's 48 days remaining in the final approval process. The LSO Administrative Rule Review, as of 8/15 of 19, the staff comment was a recommendation that the rules be placed on the consent list approved by Management Council as submitted by the agency. So we're hoping that we've hit that nice middle ground to achieve what we needed, but also for those that want to have distinguishing words within the name.
That's awesome news. Yeah, Representative Olson, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Deputy, I like that name rule. I have a question for you because I'm contemplating. We'll get to this in our discussion, but I think while I have you here, you may be able to answer some of my questions. Contemplating a change to the Series LLC law, and wondering what your capabilities of your system are to track something. So, if we currently track the series, the mother and the babies in the series, using those naming conventions. If any of those series were to be traded or transferred or sold off, and could we, utilizing your system, have so if we, my question is, if we had a requirement where you had to notify the Secretary of State's office when you transferred or sold this off, could we utilize the online system to obtain that information that it's been transferred or sold off?
Deputy Wheeler.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Olson, as it stands today, no. But if you want to do that, then we would certainly want to work with you as to the process or mechanism that you want to do to achieve that. And then we would modify our system so that you could see that and track it. And we could.
And
Follow up.
Mr. Chairman, that sounds like that costs some money then, I'm sure, to modify the system. What I'm thinking here, Deputy, is as these entities are sold or transferred off, that they would become independent entities, and that we would require that the Secretary of State's office be notified of the transfer, because then we would essentially disqualify, the law would disqualify them from the series, and we could then assess basically a formation fee at that point in time. So the idea is you create 1,000 series, you bundle whatever you put in these individual LLCs, but you decide to sell one of your LLCs, let's say, for example, because it has an autonomous driving vehicle in it. And under the current law, if you were to, I think it's arguable that if you were to transfer or sell your LLC, it still remains part of the series. But if we were to disqualify it from the series, that's what I would want to be able to do, is track it online. So you do an online filing, basically like you're forming the LLC for the first time. It would keep its origination date, but then it would be assessed the $102 actually, because there's a $2 online transaction fee. So I guess my questions are, what do we need? What do you need to know in order from us, if we were to go that route? What would I need to know what the system can do, what it's going to take to change the system in order to have that online filing. essentially. And I imagine it'd be just like if you go into your Dropbox now, you pick a new category. I don't know what you call it. We give it a fancy name.
Deputy.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, so a couple of things are going through my mind. And first and foremost, I would want to sit down with our technology director before I could even give you an answer, because I wouldn't give you the complete answer until I talk to her. But when you disassociate that series from the parent, are you wanting it to then become its own LLC, as if it's out on its own, but it still retains the date of formation from the parent?
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, go ahead.
Correct. Yeah, that's the key, is the continuity, so that that would be the benefit for the consumer to create the 1,000 series LLC, and rather than just form them on the line as they go, is to keep that origination date in order to limit the liability that could have occurred prior to selling it off. But I think what we have here is kind of a double benefit, because I think one of the biggest conversations we had was, well, someone's could be taking advantage of the state of Wyoming by creating 1,000 series LLC and paying $102 versus $100 for each of those transactions. I think under this theory, if we were to amend this law, I think the state would get its formation fee that it normally had, the $100 that it would have had otherwise. But it keeps its origination date. Yes, that's key.
I would just like to note really quick that, so when we were talking about series LLCs when we first did this, we talked to them about like children LLCs, like if there's a mother and a child, and this would be like the child LLC growing up, moving out of the house. Senator, did you trigger?
Killing me. Killing me.
Deputy Wheeler, I'm sorry, I couldn't help it.
So, Mr. Chairman, then they're moving out of the house. Are they keeping the same address, is what you're telling me?
Department there.
So, Mr. Chairman, Representative, then the first thing that's popping in my mind is, would you be creating a new entity type? It's its own LLC, but you're still going to tie it to the parent's date of formation. If so, so there's a lot of different mechanisms that I'm looking at that, again, I would need to talk to our technology director, our developers on our system, and see what we can work out to make sure that we can accomplish exactly what you're wanting. And as much as I hate to say it, yes, there would be a fiscal impact to it. What it would be, I don't know, until we can really get down to some finite discussions as to what exactly you are needing so that we can meet those.
Yeah. Mr. Coughlin, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for my colleague here. So, are you envisioning if the child LLC would sort of disappear or just convert to a different form?
Representative Olson.
Mr. Chairman, yeah, I think converts to a different form. It just becomes you unbundle the sticks, and so then thank you, Representative Western. I can't claim that for my own, but yeah. So I guess it would just become. Now we call it a series LLC. We call the whole thing a series, but I guess it would just become an LLC. Or you could choose whatever you wanted to but it would just be an LLC, I'm sure.
Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Coughlin.
So, Ms. Wheeler, I guess I have a question in that case, because we could just file articles of amendment or amended articles or articles of conversion or something to change that LLC, which there would be some filing then that creates this new entity with the original date. But what would happen in the system then? So if you filed amended articles for this new LLC to convert it from a series LLC to just a traditional, manager managed LLC, what happens in the system with respect to the old series LLC? Nothing, because nothing needs to happen?
Yeah, go ahead, Deputy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Kaufman. Because we do have conversions right now in our system. So it does show the linkage. It shows what it was, what it has converted to. It has all the dates associated with it, plus the original date of formation. So that framework is already there, which will minimize your fiscal impact. if that's the route you wish to go.
Mr. Chairman, one more. So that's what I was getting at.
Yeah,
Is I'm,
follow.
I'm not sure. I think this process may already be something that we could do with the current filing through an amendment or a conversion. You're just changing the nature of an already existing LLC, which is something that the system already does. Correct?
Deputy?
Ms. Wheeler?
And Mr. Chairman, Mr. Hoffman.
You want to get that?
So it might cost nothing. Representative Western had a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Deputy, so just a curiosity, so sticking with the kind of the analogy that we've been going with, so if that parent LLC has a child LLC, but they want to split off as in a standalone LLC, will they have to refile that fee and pay the full $100 or $102 or whatever it is?
Deputy?
Thanks, Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, Representative, based on the conversation so far, yes. If that series breaks away from the parent and forms on its own, then yes.
I'm gonna bring up something crazy here. I mean, we're talking about spinning off one of the children LLCs. But what happens, say, for example, I own several LLCs myself. It would be super handy if I could just bundle those up like sticks into a series. That's one filing fee that I pay at that point instead of going after each one of my LLCs. So, I mean, just as an option, and while we're thinking about this, it might be worthwhile looking. Yep.
But I'd really like you to pay for all three corporations on behalf of the state, so I like the other idea.
And so because you're forgetting that because it goes on what each LLC is actually worth, I'm paying a 2 mil rate on that, regardless if it's a series or standalone. So I actually have a higher chance of triggering that 2 mil rate by bundling them together than keeping them separate.
Right, but it's a base of $50. So if you're below the 250,000, and it's 2 mils at that point, so the math will always work out that you're better off having more corporations than what you're saying. So more money. Go team.
Deputy, you want to go down that? No.
No,
Okay.
not
All right. Any other questions or comments? Deputy, I did find that email. I'd like to go, if you're going to be sticking around, I would like to go offline with you about that situation. I think it's probably one of those deals where something slipped through an email crack or something.
I would be happy to take care of that, Mr. Chairman.
Awesome. Thank you, Deputy. Any other questions? Seeing none? Thank you, Deputy. We're going to go into public comment in regards to LLCs, series, standalone, hybrid. Whoever wants to talk about it. Sticks, children, definitely children. In fact, if you come up here and testify in regards to series LLCs, the chair will ask you to use the proper nomenclature to include children and mother. So, nope, no public comment. Committee. I'm closing public comment in
Mr.
regards to LLC. Oh, Ms. Long, go
Before you close
ahead.
public comment, we heard from the CEO of Kraken, Jesse Powell, in Jackson about this. I was wondering, since we do have Kraken folks in the room, if they had any insight into what Jesse had in mind. If not, I don't need to put you on the spot. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, Bobby Zagata. Kraken. Yeah, I mean, I think not to speak for Jesse, but we've had a lot of conversations as we've gotten more excited about what you guys are doing here, frankly. And one of the things that we think would be a benefit to some of our customers would be to execute the crypto side of their business or of their investing via an LLC in Wyoming. Why? Because we think that would afford them certain advantages, particularly if they're in a less friendly crypto jurisdiction, such as New York or another one. So, with that in mind, Jesse had the thought, could we somehow enable our customers to, via API or some other electronic means to get into a series LLC process very, very seamlessly. And that could be a benefit for our customers, and it could be a benefit for the state of Wyoming. So that's admittedly just an idea that we've been kicking around a little bit, but we thought it could be, in line with a lot of what we're talking about in terms of creating more commerce and more value for the state. That answer your question?
Bob, I'm going to mess up your last name. Can you say it slow?
Zagata.
Zagata?
Yeah.
All right, Mr. Zagata. Any questions for Mr. Zagata? Zagata. Can't help it. I'm just going to screw it up. Thank you, Bob. Appreciate it. Any other public testimony in regards to LLCs? Seeing none, we're closing that one out. Any motions? Actions? Representative Olson.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to make a motion for a bill draft. I think it can be pretty simple, so I don't want to add too. I don't like adding to the pot this late in the game, but it's simple enough. I think we can do it. So this would be a motion to amend our series LLC statute so that it says that if you sell off any part of a series, trade, transfer, whatever it is, that the action of doing that disqualifies the LLC that has been sold or transferred off. So it is no longer a member of the series. It becomes its own entity automatically. So I think it's a tangent, but I think that actually addresses Mr. Kaufman's question. Actually, I think you could file it as an amendment, but we want to make it an automatic for the person who's already sold it off. I think is what this is doing, so that they don't circumvent that process. So it is disqualified, becomes its own entity, maintains continuity of life. So the origination date, formation date, remains. And then there's we'll call it a formation fee. And then I think the statute can probably just reference back to whatever, you set that whatever you want, Senator Nethercott. I know you like that. I'd say $100 though.
Is that the motion? Is there a second? Is there a second? There.
Second.
Thank you, Representative
Young.
Yep, Mr. Co-Chairman.
The workflow on that seems a little challenging, whereas if we just had it so that you had to have it be its own entity, sell it. In other words, you can't sell a child corporation. That would be challenging. So, or a child LLC. So if I want to sell that entity, I would simply graduate it to be a full LLC and then sell the full LLC. If we have a process for that in place, we don't need to have anything to say about the sale itself. We can be silent on it. We don't. The concern I have with the workflow there is the Secretary of State's office is not going to know when one of these LLC children is sold, and that's not something they should have to track or care about. So if I want to sell one of my LLC's children to Representative Lindholm, I would or should have to graduate it to an LLC, and then we already have all the legal structure in place that we need to. Nothing new has to happen. To do that graduation, I would simply file a change of status. And again, I think I probably already can do that. If not, we need to change the statute to allow for that graduation so that I can have a change of status between an LLC child and a full LLC. But it seems to me that we don't need to get into the game of transferring or ownership or anything else. All we need to do is say or ensure that an LLC child can become a standalone LLC. And when we do that, everything else is fine, taken care of, and we can be silent, which at that point, it's probably a paragraph of drafting, if that makes sense. So I understand the concept. I think we need to solve for that concept, but I don't think the proposed motion is the most expedient way to accomplish.
Mr. Co-Chair,
Senator Nethercott.
can I have Mr. Coffin identify in his own words what he thinks the issue is we're trying to solve?
Mr. Kaufman, do you want to involve? Okay, go ahead,
Mr. Chairman, with all due respect to my colleague, I don't think this is a problem. I think the law already allows for this mechanism. The series LLC language essentially requires that the children of the series be governed and regulated by operating agreement because there really is no other way. And so you can have whatever ownership you want of any series, but if you want that entity to not be part of the series, that will require, I don't think there's any way around it, it will require articles of amendment or conversion or something to another entity, which requires registration, because that would be a fundamental change in the structure. So with all due respect, I don't think what you're asking is necessary, because I think it all works as it is now.
Mr.
Senator
Co-Chair?
Nethercott.
I agree. So I understand the issue perfectly. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Representative Wilson.
Yeah, it seems to me then the only part is I was just, trying to nab the formation fee. It seems like, I don't know what the amendment fee is. I would guess $50. So let's just backpedal. I'll switch around my motion. It doesn't have blockchain in it anyway.
You could say blockchain. Do that a lot.
Yeah, I'm just gonna withdraw.
It's for the kids.
Any other motions?
For the children.
I think you actually have an apology to LSO for taking all those notes.
You just hit the delete.
You
must have backspace. There we go.
I'll send you guys some more cookies.
They can include the minutes, discuss the motion which, and then just go on for page after page. That'd be good.
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah, Ms. Long, go ahead.
Based on what we heard from Kraken and knowledge of folks who do want to set up a large number of LLCs, I don't know if there is a motion here, but we'd just like to support the Secretary of State's office in getting that API set up as fast as possible to facilitate the large number of LLC formations.
Mr. Chairman?
Yep, go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
I think we should listen to progress and updates at the next meeting. They'll have a little bit more chance, although it is only a month from now. But I'd ask the Secretary of State's office to give some thought to the budget side of things. We wanted a budget to do this, to expedite it. We didn't end up with that in the legislation. This is a budget session. It may be more appropriate for us to look at adding some resources. So for the next meeting, let's be prepared to have a discussion about what we could do to expedite the process if we were able to work through the budget to do so. I think that might get at Long's suggestion.
Indeed, thank you.
Any other comments or questions? Seeing none, we're going to close that one out, and we are back to yesterday. And we're going to talk about digital identification discussion and hear from our working group. Representative Yin, would you like to lead that discussion?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The working group spent some time via email conversing fairly late in the game, but I think the resolution of the working group was to come up with some demos to help identify some of the use cases in a more concrete way for the committee to decide on how it wants to progress with that. I think, unfortunately, those demos aren't really available today, but I know that Mr. Allen was interested in wrangling a group of companies together for the Laramie meeting to show them off. So nothing concrete right now, though.
I think that Representative Yin, I mean, the big issue that we saw with the digital identity topic was always along the lines of what should we do? Do we look at KYC AML? Do we look at the ability for someone to have an ID on their phone issued by the state or something like that? And the list goes on. So there's for the public and those watching that don't know why why this topic is here, that's essentially the issue, is us trying to figure out if this works, is it worth merit putting in the law, anything like that. And so that hopefully we'll have something at the Laramie meeting. So there is officially no request for task force action at this time.
That's correct.
Okay. Any questions for Representative Yin? Seeing none.
And I apologize for being late for this meeting so that I couldn't talk about this yesterday.
Yeah. Well, no, it's fine. Representative Yin, I mean, Canada's beautiful this time of year, so. It's true. That's true. Is there any, I think we'll go to public comment in regards to digital identity. Does anyone, would anyone like to give public comment on that topic? No, no public comment. Closing public comment. Any action out of the committee or task force? Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Co-Chairman.
The only action I'll ask for is to ensure that we do have sufficient time on the agenda for next time to invite Mr. Allen and the task force, the working group, I should say, to present the demonstration and to hopefully come to us with some ideas on how we would want to proceed. I don't think we'll have time necessarily to draft, but we'll have to keep moving that ball forward.
Yeah, I think what we might end up doing, I guess, we'll get with your chairman will get with staff and figure out what the next agenda looks like. I'm guessing it's going to be busy. So if that's the case, we might look at doing a lunch and learn for a demo kind of situation. Whereas Senator Rothfuss, because we're going to be in his town, he would of course buy us all lunch. So that's Jimmy John's or something. Anyways, so seeing no further people wanting to actually speak on this, we're going to go ahead and close that down. Mr. Co-Chairman, actually, let's go to general. So we're done with our topics now. So this is a time where we'll accept any and all generalized comments, any and all ideas. If you just want to update us on your project or update us on what you're doing in the state of Wyoming, all is welcome. So if anybody would like to do that. Nobody wants to do that. Blame you. We're all tired. Okay. So committee, hackathon coming up. Our next task force meeting is a month away. So please be prepared for that. If you can, it would be appreciated. Task force members, we're the blockchain task force in Wyoming. It's turned into kind of a big deal. So if you can, please plan on attending the hackathon and meeting some of these folks that are traveling a long ways to come and participate in our great state. Yeah, with that, Mr. Co-Chairman, do you have anything else?
Well, one thing I'll say is, once again, thanks to everyone who traveled. All the people that have been involved are the reason that we've been as successful as we have been in innovating in this space and this with this policy. It's certainly not a series of our ideas that have brought us to where we are. It's all of you engaging with us. So we look forward to seeing all of you once again in Laramie, and we'll keep moving this forward.
And with that, we're adjourned. Or yeah, go ahead, Tamara. Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, we did adopt 3 bills to recommend on to committees, 2 of those as amended. Do you want to clarify which committees those will go to? I have the first one being the Select Committee on, it was Technology Innovation with a new name, then Municipal Bonds as Digital Securities, and finally Private Cryptographic Keys. And I think we talked about the first 2 going to corporations, and the third 2 was left open-ended.
Private cryptographic keys? You want that in judiciary? All right. One side of it.
I understand.
Yeah.
We can, we'll start it over.
Yeah, I think, judiciary is fine then. So 2 for corp. So that's not bad so far. We should see if we can get some shoved off in other directions, maybe joint travel.
Yeah.
Yeah. Ogden, that's your committee. Okay. No. All right. With that, is that it, Tamara? Okay, run the ball. We're adjourned. Thank you, guys.